A few months ago, I counted down my top 10 favorite Sonic games. So how about we look at the other side of the spectrum, the games that I don't care much for. Just like the last list, this is strictly my opinion, so if you like any of the games on this list, that's fine, but I don't. With the exception of the top 4, I don't hate any of these games. They're just the games in the series that I find to be the least enjoyable. And just so the list isn't entirely negative, I'll take a look at something positive about the game whenever I can. With that said, let's get started.
Back in 2004, Nintendo released the Nintendo DS. After the success of the Sonic Advance trilogy on the Game Boy Advance, it was only a matter of time before Sonic made his jump to the DS. And 1 year after the system's release, Sonic Rush was released. Critics and fans seem to agree that it was pretty good, but I've never cared much for it. The level design sometimes feels a little scattered, and I'm never able to keep a good sense of speed for more than a few seconds. The visuals and character models aren't bad by any means, but something about them just looks off. The controls feel a little stiff and sometimes unresponsive, but this was addressed in the much better sequel, Sonic Rush Adventure. If there is one thing about this game that's outstanding though, it's the soundtrack. From Right There Right On to Wrapped in Black, every track in Sonic Rush is filled with energy and easily sits as one of the best soundtracks in Sonic history. "2006 was a rough year for Sonic. We had Sonic 06, which I still like, though I wouldn't put it as high as I did on my original list, Sonic Genesis, and this game, Sonic Riders. While initially released with less than positive reception, Sonic Riders does have its fans. I am not one of them. The track layouts feel uninspired, I absolutely hate the air gimmick, and a lot of the music isn't very good. That said though, there are things I like about Sonic Riders. For one, it looks nice. The textures are nice, the character models look good, and the animations are smooth. And even though a lot of the music isn't very good, the music that is good is really good, the most notable track being the main theme, Sonic Speed Riders. Thankfully, all of the issues I have with this game were fixed in the sequel, Sonic Riders Zero Gravity. And then Free Riders fucked everything up. Sonic Heroes is a pretty big watershed game for the Sonic series. It has its fans, but my god do people hate this game.
Example. Hey Brian, what do you think of Sonic Heroes?
The control is slippery as fuck, and the combat is awful because the power characters are worthless against enemies with shields, and enemies with shields are fucking cheap and stupid and make me stop every 10 goddamn seconds to beat one up, which takes forever. It's slow and flows literally like shit. In other words, it's fucking awful.
See what I mean?
When I was younger, I loved Sonic Heroes. Obviously, I don't like it as much now, but I don't hate it as much as most people do. I will say that it's not a very good game, though. The controls are very slippery, and the level design incorporates a lot of bottomless pits. This, combined with the slippery controls, and the lack of something to stop you from falling, except a useless stumbling animation, leads to a lot of deaths that aren't the fault of the player, making for a pretty unenjoyable experience. But the soundtrack is pretty good, especially the vocal themes. What I'm Made Of is easily one of my favorite Sonic songs, and This Machine perfectly describes Team Dark. But I also kinda like the final boss. Sonic Chronicles is a game that pretty much everybody agrees sucks. The battle system is clunky, the visuals are worse than the Nintendo 64, the soundtrack is just butchered versions of older music, and the story is laughable. However, I don't hate this game, and I don't even dislike it as much as most people do. I won't deny that it's a terrible game and deserves all of the hate it gets, but there's something about it that made me like it more than most. This is usually about the time I'd say something good about the game, but I honestly can't think of anything. Box art was pretty good. That is seriously the only positive thing I can say about Sonic Chronicles. Moving on. Sonic Battle seems to be loved by a lot of Sonic fans. I am not included in that group of fans. This game isn't buggy or ugly or even badly designed. It's boring. The battles are so slow and uninteresting that I get bored after playing for only 5 or 10 minutes. It's got some cool ideas, like customizing Emerald with moves from other characters to make him whatever type of fighter you like, but since it's so boring, I've never cared enough to get further than an hour or so into the game. I can see why people like this game, it's just not for me. you people are gonna kill me. I don't like Sonic Advance 2. I liked the original Sonic Advance, and I love Sonic Advance 3, but Sonic Advance 2 was just awful. The level design wasn't very good, the music was just alright, and somehow the generic Eggman is doing evil, stop him storyline was worse than any of the other games. I will say that some of the level themes were pretty interesting, most notably the music stage, but that's about all the good things in Sonic Advance 2. The way of getting to the special stages was a pain in the ass too. You had to collect 7 special tokens, and not only are there just 7 in every stage, they can be incredibly hard to find if you move with any amount of speed whatsoever. And sometimes the rings just blend into the background. I can't tell you how many times I've run right past a special ring because it blended into the stage background. Sonic Advance 2 is, in my opinion, Sonic's lowest point on a handheld system. The Sega Genesis was home to mostly good Sonic games. The original trilogy, technically Sonic CD and Sonic Spinball. But then there's this game, Sonic 3D Blast. This game is just awful. The visuals are terrible, the level design is confusing because everything looks exactly the same, the controls are actually worse than Sonic Heroes, and the isometric perspective is really annoying. Sonic 3D Blast has you controlling Sonic in an isometric perspective collecting flickies. I actually don't mind this gameplay style. As a concept, anyway. It's a pretty cool idea, but the awful controls just ruin it. I'm always slip-sliding all over the place, and trying to be precise with anything is a fruitless endeavor. The game expects you to jump on enemies to kill them like in a traditional classic Sonic game, but the isometric view makes that near impossible. It's usually best to just roll into enemies, but even that can be difficult as rolling can be painfully slow, and enemies like this can still hit you. My god, I hate this game. Sonic Labyrinth is a better game than this, and that's saying a hell of a lot.
In my top 10 Sonic games list, I stated that I
hate Sonic 4 Episode 1.
I left it at that and went on to bring the sequel. So I think it's about time that I say why I hate Sonic 4 Episode 1.
First, the physics are awful. I'm not expecting realistic physics here, but I at least expect Sonic to have some difficulty going up slopes when he's going 1 mile an hour. I also expect Sonic not to stick on walls like Spider-Man. Second, the levels suck. I don't mind that the game reuses level themes from past games. What I do mind is the obnoxious amount of speed boosters and springs. The springs are mostly annoying because of the damn sound they make. After a few minutes, that becomes the most irritating thing you could possibly hear. The speed boosters are annoying because it feels like the game doesn't think you can gain speed on your own, which isn't entirely false, as Sonic's startup speed in this game is slow as molasses. It takes forever to get to full speed just by running, so I constantly find myself using the homing attack to gain speed. I really wanted to like this game, but all of these problems piled on top of each other just make for a terrible game. I do like the soundtrack, though.
Roll it!
I hate Sonic Unleashed so much. Before I bash the game, let me compliment it for a second. First, the game looks great. The lighting is nice, everything is greatly detailed, and it's just awesome to look at. Second, the soundtrack is amazing. Every song sounds great and fits the game perfectly, the most notable being Endless Possibilities. Third, the daytime levels are really fun. They're all full of speed and are incredibly fun to play. Now for the problems. First, there's the Werehog. I have no problem with the idea of the Werehog, and actually like that he was included. The reason I think the Werehog is a problem, however, is that all of the stages are incredibly tedious. They're so slow and puzzle-heavy, and they just drag on way longer than necessary. I never enjoy playing these, and hate that there are so many of them. Second, the medal collecting. I didn't mind the medal collecting for most of the game, but once I got to Adabat and needed 40 more sun medals to access the first day level, it just became a boring grind. Looking for medals combined with the tedious night stages made Sonic Unleashed one of my most hated Sonic games. But there is one worse. A Sonic game so bad that few dare to speak its name. Sonic and the Secret Rings is by far the worst Sonic game ever made. The motion controls barely work, and when they do, they're incredibly awkward. The level design is complete shit. Pretty much all of the soundtrack is awful. It looks like a PS2 game. The story is a nice idea, but is horribly executed, and the mission structure is so awful that it's actually possible to miss some of the world rings, which are plot important and necessary to finish the game. When simply backing up is a feat in and of itself, you have fucked up royally. The only good thing I can say about Sonic and the Secret Rings is that it's not the worst game I've ever played. It's ever so slightly better than Metroid Other M. It is still fucking awful though, and you should avoid it at all costs.
So those are my top 10 least favorite Sonic games. If you happen to disagree with anything on the list, feel free to leave your opinion in the comments. And just like the last list, I have no idea how to end this, so I'll do this.